Hello, dear participants. Welcome to today's session on sustaining food security, nutrition, and livelihoods, with the pandemic. Today's session is being organized under the webinar series, Development Priorities to Achieve Sustainable Development Goals, Challenges and Opportunities by IFAD Bangladesh. I'm Mohammad Rubayat Sarwar, Managing Director and Lead Consultant, Innovision. Organizing these webinars. As you all know, we are now in a very different world. In the pandemic world, where we are having to pivot many of our strategies and interventions. And as you know, the COVID pandemic, when it started, we all went into shutdown around the world. And we know by now that the COVID-induced shutdown impacted severely livelihoods of the low-income population. And it in turn impacted the food security and nutrition of the low-income population. Data and insights from multiple agencies have shown that the poor people, they were forced to reduce number of meals that they took. Their dietary diversity have been severely impacted. And we also know that they're cutting down severely on protein. The reason why today's discussion is so important, it is connected to the SDG goals of the goals related to hunger, nutrition, related to poverty. And today, we have assembled quite a few speakers who are deeply engaged with interventions supporting poor people to address these barriers of food security, nutrition, and livelihood. We have with us Mr. Robert Simpson, Resident Representative of Food and Agriculture Organization, Bangladesh. Ms. Rasha Omar, South Asia Hub Head, IFAD. Mr. Pete Voktan, Deputy Country Director, World Food Program. We have with us Ms. Mia Sepo, UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. We have Mr. Mutiur Rahman, Project Director, Additional Secretary, PMU, NATP2, Ministry of Agriculture, People's Republic of Bangladesh. Mr. Mera Bokhtiar, Acting Country Director, International Food Policy Research Institute, and Ms. Sherina Tabassum, Country Program Officer, Asia and the Pacific Division of IFAD. Without further ado, I would request Ms. Sherina Tabassum to start with her speech, her welcome speech, to set the context of today's webinar. But before I begin, two house rules. One is, I need your permission to record this session. Are you all okay with it? Dear panelists?
That's fine.
Thank you. And to all our participants joining from all around the world, I request you to take note of your queries and please ask your questions on the Q&A box that you can see at your Zoom panel. So please try to locate the Q&A panel on your Zoom screen. Please try to locate that, have it open, and ask your question on the Q&A box. Ms. Sherina Tabassum, over to you.
Thank you, Rubayat, and it's my great pleasure to welcome everybody to today's webinar. As Rubayat introduced, we have a very distinguished panel today who are going to take us through the various challenges, not only in responding to COVID and increasing resilience of the agriculture sector, but also sharing their insights and their experiences in helping Bangladesh and its people, especially the smallholder farmers, in dealing with the agricultural development and striving to reach the sustainable development goals. I will briefly introduce the Bangladesh country program of IFAD here. As you can see on the slide, we have 7 active projects currently, and the outreach of the portfolio is 11.7 million households. And this is no small feat, given that agriculture remains to be a very important sector for Bangladesh. Next slide, please. As I said, our outreach is 11.7 million cumulatively, and the current portfolio itself is reaching out to 4.5 million, which amounts to 21% of the rural population of Bangladesh. And we will hear from our panelists such as Mr. Motiur Rahman and Ms. Rasha Omar, a bit more details on these issues. We also have very strong partnership. If you can move to the next slide, please. We have very strong partnerships with other development partners, the government of Bangladesh, a number of ministries of the government of Bangladesh, including the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Water Resources. And then we will also, when we listen to our panelists, we will also hear from them how we are collaborating with each other. And these are very important in the broader picture of sustainable development in Bangladesh. We have IFPRI today with us. We have similar partnerships with organizations like World Fish, ERI, and CIMIT. And today's webinar is very important because it's going to mark the end of a 3 webinar series that we launched last month. And this webinar brought together not only development partners, but key actors from the government, civil society, academia, and that culminated in very rich discussions, which hopefully is going to feed into the country strategy of IFAD that we are going to embark on next year. So without further ado, Rubaiyat, I would like to give the floor back to you, if you could proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tabassum, for your short speech, but for setting the context for today's webinar. Now, we'll move on to the discussion of today's session. As I have said, all data and insights from multiple agencies have been showing that food security and nutrition and livelihoods have been impacted. The reason why I believe this is so important is because it's connected to not only the current context of poverty, but also for the world's future about poverty. If children and mother, they're deprived of nutrition, it will inadvertently affect the poverty situation of the world in 5 to 10 years' time. We'll hear more about it from our panel. I'll first come to Mr. Merab. Mr. Merab, are you there?
I'm here, Rubaiyat.
Fantastic. So, Mr. Merab, IFPRI has been undertaking a lot of investigation, and I've been part of a few. So I'll come to you first, and please explain to us some of your insights on the challenges that you're seeing on food security, nutrition and livelihood, agricultural value chains and market systems. Over to you, Mr. Merab.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Rubaiyat, and thank you everyone. And special thanks to IFAD for organizing this event and inviting IFPRI. So I'll just give some quick background. So we know that Bangladesh has been able to have the prevalence of poverty, between 2000 and 2016, which is remarkable. The COVID-19 pandemic has been putting this remarkable progress at risk. IFPRI has carried out 4 rounds of phone surveys on nationally representative samples since the pandemic started. And at least in the initial months, we saw that these gains in poverty reduction in the last decades or so may have eroded, and primarily because of rising unemployment, decreasing incomes, worsening food insecurity, and households having to undertake expensive coping strategies. However, the good news is that the initial shock, I think has been arrested to a certain extent. And we have seen that over time, several of these socioeconomic indicators have improved. And in particular, outcomes related to employment, income, and food security. So broadly, Bangladesh has been able to make substantial progress in improving food security by increasing domestic production, right? And also by improving access to food, by increasing household income, and strengthening safety net transfer programs over the years. There have been a number of challenges, however, even before COVID-19 came into play. Before COVID-19 came into play, the potential agricultural growth and food and nutrition security uh, uh, have been threatened by the population growth, worsening soil fertility, deteriorating access to increasingly scarce natural resources, increasing vulnerability of improved crop varieties, and so on and so forth, right? So how has COVID-19 complicated these challenges even further? So the good, I should quickly talk about the good side of things a little bit, right? The government has been able to arrest a number of supply side problems early on in the pandemic, which includes, making sure that the transportation sector was not disrupted so that the agricultural input and output market did not face prolonged disruptions, right? So which means that in terms of food availability in the market, that has not been a huge issue, right? So the primary channel to food security has been through the food accessibility channel, which is a function of, or which depends on food prices, household income, and assets, right? So the household income portion is the channel that we think why food security is facing some problems. So decreased household income can deteriorate household food security. So because the food security measures from large surveys have shown that it has improved since the start of the pandemic, but still a substantial portion of the population still remains at risk, which I hope to actually elaborate more later on. We have also found that a large portion of the population was able to access food-based assistance from the government in the initial months, which was very helpful for them. Some other government initiatives, however, such as the low-interest agricultural loans, has not been accessed by farmers as much. So major crop farmers have received good prices compared to last year, but at the same time, labor shortages and higher agricultural wages likely have undercut profitability for farmers. Non-crop farmers, including fisheries, dairy, poultry farmers, took a huge hit, but I think they're in the path of recovery. On the other hand, high-value non-food cash crops, such as flowers and flower farmers, they took a substantial hit and may need specific or special assistance from the government to be able to recover properly. So I'll just stop there and maybe have the conversation moving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Merab. Thank you so much. You touched on some very interesting points, and I've taken note of what you've said as like the government arrested some of the challenges pretty early, which is related to, let's say, food availability, but the trend has been on food accessibility and people's ability to afford food. And but you also talked about some of the interventions like social safety nets, which I will come at a later stage of this. Mr. Moti Rahman, sir, are you there? Mr. Moti Rahman, sir, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I am here, please.
Thank you so much. So, sir, how food access has been an issue, but not availability. NATP2 has been working with farmers, and he spoke about, let's say some of the initiatives are not reaching out to the farmers, or farmers being hard hit, and some of the non-crop farmers being hard hit. So over to you to explain.
Please pardon, I was disrupted for a few seconds. Please again repeat, please.
So the challenges that you have seen on the ground with your beneficiaries on food security and nutrition.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. The challenges already in food security and nutrition livestock already during pandemic situation. So we face a lot during pandemic situation. Some of the challenges, I think that at the beginning, the country was locked down during April to June, totally locked down. It was the government decisions. There was general holiday or general leave for pandemic situation. For this, why due to all the transportation facilities was disrupted, in Bangladesh. Buyer did not reach to farmers. It forced them to. By this time, they are forced to sell their product in a very low price. Many of the farmers even did not harvest their product in the farm side, actually for low price. Many farmers even did not harvested vegetable due to extreme low price. All the farmers faced by this way they faced economic loss. And there was also a false propaganda, in society. Many of the people thought that coronavirus and COVID-19 may transmit from livestock and poultry and other product like milk and eggs. By the eggs, by the poultry farm, it can spread. Previously, many of the people was thought the virus comes from this poultry farm or like this. So there was a superstition, and for this why this caused the huge price fall in of milk, meat, and eggs. So milk processing companies were also found to be uninterested to purchase milk and collect from the collection point from the farmers. They were not collecting the product. So by this way, all our farmers was very much hard positions. And self-employed day laborers were almost out of their daily income. By this way, they faced many challenges, and if you think our NATP2 project is the largest project in still now in agriculture ministry. So we have 40,000 CAG group. That means we cover almost 10 million, 1 million farmers we cover. So they were also in a tough position in pandemic situation. The resulting in the in this situation, our production was slow down, and our NATP2 implementation progress also was in challenge. By this, and we have 51 research project and 140 PhD program in our country and abroad. But all this program and research program also was in challenge, and our productions was also in challenge. And ground trotting, field visit, and group visit, and group sharing was also in challenge. This was our main activity with our farmer, but we faced many challenges with them. However, these are the challenge, I think, was from government side and from our project side also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Motiraman, for reflecting on your experience. And you did point out to the fact that, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a rumor on the consumption of livestock and how it can affect or transmit COVID, and which really impacted not only protein consumption, but also it impacted livestock production quite heavily. But as Mr. Merab was saying, some of these, impacts were more transient, and we started to move farther. So that leads me to our next discussant, Mr. Robert Simpson. Robert, are you there?
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
So Robert, I mean, the discussion has started to build up. So as you have heard from our speakers, they have been talking about several dimensions. And I think one dimension that is coming up is about the transient nature of the impacts. And I know that FAO has been undertaking works not only in Bangladesh, but around the world. So from your experience, if you could highlight to us some of those challenges which you think are more permanent or deeper and that requires some attention. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you to IFAD for taking the initiative to organize this really great webinar. I think this is very timely for a number of reasons. First, as our previous speakers have pointed out, we're moving beyond the initial challenges of lockdown all over the world. And we're moving on to basically how we operate in this environment with COVID. But we also have the hope of vaccines on the way. So there's a number of different elements to this, but I'll take maybe 1 minute just to go back to the earlier portions of this. And FAO had been monitoring food prices globally and supply chains globally as a much more macroeconomic situation of food and food security around the world. And it was, never was there a moment where there was a huge concern about grain production, staple production around the world. The major issue is a question of distribution. So the major policy recommendations that FAO was making at the time was really to keep supply chains open and encouraging governments not to go into any sort of quarantine or lockdown in terms of their production and supply and sale of commodities globally. I think that was very important. Within the lockdown situation, I'll add a little bit to what our previous speakers have already mentioned, and that is that there was a massive, massive decrease in food demand, as a matter of fact, because all the restaurants were closed, people were eating at home more. There's a much greater economy of food production and consumption when it's more household-based in that regard. So this idea of the amount of food that was consumed in terms of restaurants, the fear of going out and shopping, so shopping habits had changed. And clearly changes in food consumption patterns. These were all big issues that had changed, and these were global, but they also happened in almost every country. So you can look at this as a global issue and also a local issue. The supply chains themselves at country level were often impacted, and this goes down for labor issues, input dealers, seeds, fertilizers, machinery, logistics, marketing, trading systems, all of it. And so this was a major area that had to be addressed. And I think as we move on our discussions today, we'll see a number of ways that has been addressed. I think in terms of impacts and challenges, the initial price volatility was a major issue. And this impacted in many different ways, particularly in nutrition. So I think the price volatility and then rural and urban poverty had a massive nutritional impact. And it was already pointed out about milk and eggs and poultry and fisheries. All perishable goods went down in price and were very difficult in terms of production. The other area that I think is still recuperating from this is the spin-off negative impacts. That's looking at all those industries that are linked to like the farming industry, for example, or food production, food supply, food systems. And so that would be rural shops, input dealers, the small transporters, everything that revolves around this rural economy has been heavily impacted. And I won't go into great detail because I think my colleague from WFP is going to highlight this a bit more. But FAO and WFP had just finished a pretty significant survey that looks at the COVID challenges and impacts on nutrition and poverty about 9 months after all of this. And some of the main findings are that rural and urban communities are still heavily impacted. In some cases, there's up to 25% reduction in income and 15% reduction in how households are spending on food. And particularly that impacts the nutritional vulnerability of these communities. So maybe a takeaway before I end is really that we see that there's not necessarily a food security issue in global terms, but we have a food distribution challenge. And a lot of it is linked to the challenges of poverty that we're seeing continuing as a result of this. and also the ability to cope with that poverty. And so there's been a lot of negative coping strategies that are impacting the household capital and their ability to be resilient in the long term, but also to future and current shocks. So we have another cyclone or flooding in the near term. These are the sort of things that are really pushing a good percentage of the population to fall back into a poverty and food insecurity. But I'll stop there because I think there are some strategies to deal with this, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about those shortly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Great to know about the study that you have done on COVID challenges after 9 months. I'm sure if the document is available, we all can benefit by reading it, the findings. So appreciate if you can share with us any link to the document. You started to speak about the food distribution challenge. And I think, you started to speak a little bit about the systems issue is related to, let's say, how to make the food available to the people. So I'll move on to Pete. Pete, are you there with me?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Pete. So, so we were hearing from Robert about the challenges. So I would ask you to build further on the points that he mentioned about the food distribution challenges, but also, if you can, a little bit highlight on the systems issues, let's say, challenges with regards to reaching out to the people, making the food distribution equal or equitable. So please go ahead, Rob, Pete.
Okay, thank you. So let me also start by saying thank you for the opportunity and for this very interesting topic to bring up. And yeah, as Robert was saying, the impact was not so much in production, but mainly at access. And having the nationwide lockdown, that resulted in a lot of impact on the economy, meaning people lost their jobs, factories were closed, people moved. There was quite a lot of movement from urban areas to rural areas. Schools were closed. So that then means that people have no longer the means to buy the food, or at least have much reduced means to buy food. At some stage, you saw more than 70% of poor people lost their main source of income. So what happened then, that means people start resorting to eating less nutritious dense food, where you traditionally already have a diet that's quite high in starch content, in sugars. Add to that a situation wherein people have less cash. That means protein, which normally are more expensive, get even eaten less. So what's the impact of that? Well, if you look at young children, babies, when you have to grow, you need protein. So this has an impact at the moment, but it will also have an impact which will be sounding back for many years when these young children, these babies of today, become adults. They will be less grown. They will have some impact on their growth and on their development. Similarly, when you're looking at school feeding, for instance, a program that has been suspended, an important program that helps children to get minimum nutritional intake per day. Again, when that is limited, there's a lot of impact that has today. And then we'll still have to see what the impact is, whether all these children are coming back to school or not, which then has an impact in the future on the income earning capabilities of these future adults. Because the longer you've been in school, the more you're educated, the more productive you can become, and the higher income you can earn, therefore also the better nutritional status that you can have. So the repercussions of the COVID impact is not just today, but will be there for many years. So a little bit on the survey that Robert was referring to. So together with FAO, we surveyed around 4,000 households just last month in November. Unfortunately, the report is still not ready. We're still analyzing the data, but my colleagues quickly teased out some important data, and we're looking at 2/3 of rural poor, 57% of urban poor have unacceptable food consumption. So the food they're eating is not diverse enough, is not healthy enough to actually give them a normal nutritious diet. This represents in the order of 20 to 25 million people in the country that we're looking at who don't have sufficient food security. If we look at vulnerability, which is a similar but slightly different from food insecurity, we're looking at around 17 million rural people and rural poor people and 10 million poor urban people who are really very vulnerable. Which doesn't mean that the other poors aren't vulnerable, but they're less vulnerable, but definitely further compounding economic impact of the pandemic can definitely have major impact on that. So the report itself will probably come out somewhere in January, and we will then definitely share the link with you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Pete. Lovely. I mean, this point that there are 22 to 25 million people who have insufficient food, and I mean, that's very important, I believe. And also, you talked about how the impact on the school feeding program will have a, more long-term impact on nutrition of the school-going children. And very well noted your point that, the food security of mother and children, it will have actually a very long-term impact on poverty, actually. And we know that the 1,000 days window is very critical for nutrition. And what we are starting to see probably is that 1,000 days will be affected if this continues. Especially, I think all of you so far have highlighted that income continues to be low for the poor earning population, and therefore their consumption of food has remained low. So if this continues for next 6-7 months, then we are actually talking about a critical period of babies who were born during this period. Having said that, Rasha, I'll come to you, even though I was supposed to come to you earlier. So the reason why I was holding a bag on that, Rasha, are you there with me?
Yes, Rubaiyat, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. So Rasha, we have started to see a pattern, and we're saying that food production was not an issue. It was rather the supply. So that's one. And the other issue I think we are hearing is that because income has depleted and because the farmers have not been able to sell, Mr. Moti Rahman also spoke about it, they were not able to sell, they did not harvest. So eventually it is supposed to have therefore the consumption of food by the poor agriculture households. So over to you, Rasha, to explain to us how you have mapped the challenges on agricultural production systems over this course and how you see its impact on food security and nutrition and livelihoods.
Thank you very much, Rubaiyat, and thank you very much for my fellow panelists. I found the description on the impact of COVID on nutrition, food systems, food security, and livelihood extremely interesting. And also to see what you mentioned earlier, the transient effect, but also the risks if this situation persists longer, the risk on nutritional aspects. So to start with, Rubaiyat, I think my fellow panelists have really described very well the challenges. Perhaps what I can contribute is more
what we have seen in terms of resilience. Because as mentioned, perhaps production was not hit as badly by the pandemic, but definitely there were disruptions in the supply and distribution chains for food. And this has also led to the emergence of new models for food distribution as well as marketing. And allow me perhaps to state that there were three main factors of resilience that we have seen to support households, rural households during this pandemic. The first one is really the importance of agricultural marketing and related infrastructure. What we have seen, and I believe also some of the participants have raised it, is actually this pandemic and the situation it has created has shown that shorter value chains were perhaps more appropriate for the situation that was being faced. And we saw several farmers resort to direct selling to urban consumers. And we also saw that those farmers who were linked to institutional markets, for example, the midday school meals or other government entities, were also able to overcome this situation. In addition to this, we also saw that wherever produce could be stored, could be processed in order to increase its shelf life, this also helped farmers fetch a better price for their production. And finally, as Mr. Bakhtiar was mentioning, certain high-value non-food commodities were severely hit because the demand in the market changed. And Mr. Bakhtiar also mentioned the changes affecting the high-value flour production. And we have seen in parts of the country how quickly also there was support to flour producers to be able to shift to other markets that would use not fresh flours, but processed flours in order to save their production and their investment. What we have also seen is that I believe also one of our colleagues in the chat box, Ms. Lalita Bhattasharji, had mentioned also about hygiene and safety along the value chain as well as in the market. And very much with thanks to FAO and WHO for putting out the COVID-safe protocols, the agency Palikarma Sahayak Foundation has quickly developed a set of 14 protocols for COVID-safe logistics, agri-logistics, that span from handling the produce to transporting it to redesigning markets in order to ensure safety and hygiene and the reduction of any risk of transmission. So this was very much on the agricultural, marketing, and infrastructure side. And this pandemic basically is showing us a different way of going about marketing agricultural production. The second, what we have seen is the farmers who were better capable of mitigating the impact of the pandemic and its disruptions were those who were already members of producers' collectives. Being together in a collective meant that they would have access to inputs. They would also have access to machinery services in order to face the scarcity in labor, as well as they would also have access to storage capacity, aggregation facilities, and so forth to be able to sell their produce or store it until demand picks up. And we have also seen that in these producers' collectives, there was also quite a lot of solidarity among the members. And the third factor of resilience was very much related to access to finance. As Pete has mentioned, we do observe a reduction in income, and very much households then rely on borrowing to be able to, compensate for their loss in earnings. And during these times, we see that access to finance is extremely important, especially access to financing household consumption or supporting working capital in enterprise in order to be able to weather the current crisis. So we have seen that, making sure that agricultural finance, enterprise finance, household finance keeps flowing during these periods was extremely important. And despite the moratorium, the first 6 months that was imposed on the first 6 months, we have seen that microfinance has picked up from September onward to allow basically households to recover from the pandemic shock. Thank you very much, Rubaiyat. I'll stop here and over to you.
Thank you, Rasha. Thank you for, bringing forth another perspective. I think, what is so important in what you have shared is if we analyze what has worked, we also understand how or why it did not work for many, and how then we can do this for others who were not, for instance, or who did not have access to this, like you said, diversified market opportunities. Farmers who were directly selling, they were more resilient. So why other farmers could not probably directly sell, and what we can do in that regard. So we can really map those interventions by what you were saying. You highlight access to machineries, aggregation facilities, so on and so forth as important features of resilience. So thank you, Rasha, on that. We have started to receive a few important questions. So we will spend the next 5 minutes on responding to a few of those questions. Appreciate, dear panelists, if you allow, let me know who of you want to answer which questions. I will raise them to you. So I think the first question that I can see is, what is the role of distributed food storage systems in Bangladesh in ensuring fair prices and preventing food losses, by Mr. Babu? So please check who of you want to answer this question. Let me know. There's also a question from Ms. Angelica. Is there an example of a sustainable food distribution channel in Bangladesh during this pandemic? There's also a question on food distribution is a great challenge. What will be the steps to face it with good local governance? I think that question we will respond later. So do you want to take any of these questions at this point? Any of you? Rasha, Robert, Pete, Mr. Merab, Mr. Motir.
Mr. Rubaiyat, please. I was starting to respond to Ms. Lalita Bhattacharjee, and greetings to her because we had met in India a couple of times. So Ms. Lalita raises a very important point, and as mentioned earlier, already government entities are considering promoting better hygiene and better safety across the, let's say, the value chain for agricultural commodities. So from basically production to consumers. And what we have seen in the 14 protocols that the PKSF has developed is that they really adopt, they have developed these protocols for each segment in the value chain. And we believe that the more these kinds of protocols are disseminated and adopted, we will be achieving much better food safety standards in Bangladesh. Thank you. Over to you, Rubaiyat.
Yeah, thank you, Rasha. So, Pete, is there any question that you want to answer? Robert?
I'm happy to say a few words about a few of them. I noticed there was one on our areas and sustainability. First, I see the word sustainability used quite frequently. And, I think in this day and age right now, I don't think there's anything that we can truly call sustainable. The world is changing and everything is so dynamic, especially in this time of COVID, that to think of something that's sustainable, I'm not sure that applies to this context 100%. I would think that is more of a longer term, consistent with environmental and inputs, outputs sort of situation. But in particular in the Howrah area, we've more because of the flooding and a little bit less because of COVID, we've have a project that's funded by the Japanese government that looks at basically 3 different components within the Howrah area, and certainly looking at production. And this is including high nutrition crops, diversification to address some of the nutrition areas. A second is the marketing or shortening of supply chains, so helping farmers get their products directly to market. and then resilience. And I think the resiliency is really this longer term, more so than sustainability, is how do you help farmers that are in these difficult situations be more resilient to the different shocks that they're going to be encountering. And the resilience part of this is looking at safety within the supply chain. So this was also mentioned also by Rasha, and best agriculture practices. So looking at safety in terms of quality of product, and then food safety in terms of in the processing, making sure that pesticide residues and other such things are not a safety issue in that regard. In terms of value chains overall, WFP and FAO have put together what I think is a really progressive and useful pilot program that's helping to address some of these poverty issues in linking rural producers that are using and teaching them best agriculture practices and addressing food safety in all of its different forms through a shortened supply chain that goes through local farmers markets and then eventually is provided to the most vulnerable and in need urban groups that are victims of this food security situation. So I think that's quite important. There was one other question that came up that I was going to respond to, but I don't have it. The food storage. I think food storage is very interesting, and this has been mentioned already by Rasha, but anytime that you're able to do some sort of value added or transformation of your food product to help it store longer, you're going to be more resilient in these situations. As you process food, you start to lose some of the nutritional value, unfortunately, but these are I think trade-offs that have to be addressed. And so Bangladesh is notoriously a bit behind for its cold storage and cold chain capacity. So I think these are some of the areas that have to be addressed in the near term as we build more resilience into the food supply chains. I'll stop there. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. I will move on, but there are questions coming up for you too, which includes this very important one, gender dimension to food security. So please have a look on this question and try to respond to them as we move on. Mr. Merab, I'm coming back to you. So you spoke about the challenges that you have registered or analyzed from IFAD.
Rubaiyat, I want to, Rubaiyat, Mr. Rubaiyat.
So we need to move on. Yes, sir, we need to move on.
Okay.
You can respond to the question in your presentation. So, Mr. Merab, are you there? Mr. Merab, are you there? I think we have missed Mr. Merab. So, Mr. Moti Rahman, you can start, sir. So, from
yes,
you can share
please.
from NATP's. Yes. So you can NATP's point of view that you can address some of these challenges. Over to you, sir.
Pardon, again, please. I was disrupted. Communication was disrupted again, please.
My question to you is if you can reflect on the interventions of NATP to address the food security issues.
Yes, I will say about this. Before this, I want to reply on questions from House. Mr. Hussein Muhammad Jahangir, he asked a question: how can we reduce transportation cost for agriculture food current situation or program current for vehicles supports, etc. So for this question, I want to say government take initiative. You know, from very beginning, government already take initiative so that if all the transportation was closed, but only for the vehicle, those who can those vehicle will carry only the agricultural product was free for those, and government already supported to carrying the vegetables and other agricultural commodities was free, and government tried to support the subsidy, give subsidy with the system. Okay, but other than this, in our project, you know, we are trying to access the farmer to marketing system. So we want to, it's also our also objectives to access the farmers in market. We want to, we have an object to develop the marketing linkage and agricultural value chain through established and community-based market system. You know, in all over country, we established 30 CCMC. That means a community based marketing system. In this system, we introduce some vehicles in a group. In this group, 700 farmers involved. Their product they can carry to this CCMC, that means collection center. And from this collection center, in this collection center, we provide some vehicles like pickup vans, etc., and in a subsidized rate. That means any entrepreneur can buy a pickup with 50% money. They will give for 50% money, and we will provide 50% money from our project. And by this way, we developed entrepreneur in the CCMC and the center, collection center, and by this way we help them to minimize the or reduce the transportation cost. Anyway, this is our NTP2 project. We support the farmer. In this system, we have many in many ways we give the support in our farmers. You know, Ministry of Agriculture already circulated in wider communications of the government and the incentive package already distributing free import seeds and fertilizers to the farmers. And our Department of Agriculture is one of our component in project component. They also made an office order for its local offices to ensure implementations of Prime Minister directives to utilize every inches of the cultivable land. And government dropped all the foreign trainings and element from the development project and put to hold purchasing of the high value item like vehicles, and regularly monitoring the food prices of the open market, increased the open market sales and basic food items. To respond to the impact of the COVID-19 and other natural disaster, Ministry of Agriculture has prepared and endorsed action plan. You know, action plan 2020. Already Agriculture Ministry have established this plan, and with the objectives of the project and make the agricultural production profitable, maintained and sustainable in agricultural production's growth, improving value chains and agri-marketing, and ensuring fair market price to the farmer, and further the diversifications of agriculture and productions of crops with high nutrient content, and improving the capacity of the response to COVID-19 like situation. And in this plan, they include 38 short-term, 32 mid-term, and 27 long-term project, you know, in this action plan. And again, related to this action plan, NATP2 has also a plan there was an agreement we reached with the development partner, this means World Bank and IFAD, and the Ministry of Agriculture, restructuring our project that include scale down some of the activities that are impractical to implement under COVID-19, including cancellations of the foreign training and foreign bridging program. We already cancelled it only for COVID-19, and so that this money will go for farmer directly. Reprioritizing the ongoing activities and scale up COVID-19 response, supportive activities under the supply chains, and we give critical agricultural input, promotion of the innovation solutions of the labor and market construction, and the promotions of the post-harvest technology transfer and safe storage, and etc. We already implementing this critical input for farmers, and we are giving seed, fertilizer, etc. The farmers directly, so that they can benefit it in COVID period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for elaborating on the government's policies as well and the action plans. Very well noted, and we are seeing that there are some actions going on in the field. I would like to now welcome again Mr. Merab quickly. So you have heard from Mr. Motiur Rahman about some of the actions. So are there any other actions that you would recommend to address some of these compelling issues?
Sure. Thank you, Rubaiyat. Sorry, I was having some internet trouble, so I joined through my mobile phone. So the government has undertaken a number of activities and has, in terms of the stimulus package, for example, is a huge amount. So, for example, for agricultural loans, the government put aside around 5,000 crore taka, which would be disbursed at a 4% annual interest rate to farmers as well as traders, basically, or any agricultural value chain actors potentially. So we carried out a survey in August, September on farmers all around Bangladesh on a representative sample. So we found that most of the farmers they heard about this loan, right? This 4% interest rate, low interest rate loan. However, only 5% of the farmers applied for these loans, and less than 1% of the farmers they received their loans, around 0.7 or 0.7% or so. So in terms of actual reach, there seems to be an issue. So targeting seems to be an issue, and also there seems to be a reluctance from the farmer side to avail some of the services. We actually did follow up and ask them, those who knew about these loans, why did you not apply? A big portion said they didn't know how to apply for the loans, and also pointed to potential bureaucratic issues to accessing the loans. So maybe there could be things like that the government would focus on. And in terms of, since I'm talking about targeting, right, in terms of what is the best way to make sure that a big portion of the population are reached, the government did I think a much better job when it came to say in-kind assistance, food-based assistance. So from our surveys in the period between April and June, right, the 3 months after the pandemic started in Bangladesh, we found that around 20% of all rural households received some form of in-kind assistance from the government, right? And also the targeting was quite was better in the sense that more poor households got food-based assistance than non-poor households. So 24% of the poor of the households in the poorest quintile, like the bottom of the distribution, they got food-based assistance compared to 13% of the highest quintile, right? So the targeting was good. On the other hand, the cash-based assistance which was received, the targeting wasn't as good. So it seems like 7% of non-poor households and 7% of poor households received cash-based assistance, right? So that there seems to be some issues with targeting. Bangladesh has been giving out, the government has, in terms of assistance, in terms of targeting, there is a long history. So this targeting, I think, is key when it comes to, dealing with, this food insecurity based issues, because going back to the original point that I think several people have mentioned so far, is that the issue is not the production. The potential threat to food security comes from from the livelihoods channel, basically, like lower income, and that would force households to consume less and kind of worse quality diets.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for shedding a light on that. Robert, I'm coming back to you. So we are hearing about the government's participation being key. So my question to you is how you have been working with the government with regards to the policy support for the government in building a sustainable food system amid this pandemic. So if you could quickly reflect in 2 minutes.
Yeah, two minutes. Thank you.
I'm running out of time, sorry.
No, I understand. Well, I think one of the major things we should say for, speaking for the UN is well, I'll speak for FAO, Mia will speak for the UN, but really we have a philosophy of no one left behind. So we really have to focus on the hardest hit within this process. And so we really focus on our smallholders. Within that, we've provided a lot of policy support, but also some field level activities on how you support the smallest of the smallholders. And as Rasha had pointed out earlier, it's very important that we see much greater resilience in groups that are already organized. So producer organizations, cooperatives, et cetera. One of our projects is called the Missing Middle Initiative, provided support both upstream and downstream in a very rudimentary telephone-based marketing system initially that evolved into an online system to allow farmer producer organizations to continue their business during the lockdown period. So these are some of the few farmers that were able to continue their business and have almost zero impact during the lockdown period. So I think these are some of the really important areas in this regard. And then a more recent project is looking more specifically with WFP at how do you link the farmers that are most in need to producer markets and the urban poor that need food. Again, trying to tackle some of these distribution issues. So I think these are very important areas to look at in the immediacy of this, the aftermath of COVID and the last, hopefully, year of COVID that we have. But I think there's a bigger issue that we have to look at as well. And this is our dialogue with the government, which is ongoing, is that we don't know what the next shock will be. And we need strong food systems, not just agriculture, not just food vendors or on, but we need a food system that's going to be resilient to these shocks. Likely it will be a cyclone, flood, or other item, but it could be a global issue. It could be, God forbid, another pandemic or that sort. So what we really look at are both policy, communication, and then getting resources to those greatest in need. And within this resilience planning is looking at fiscal policy and ensuring access to finance for smallholders, organizing farmers and cooperative producer organizations, business planning. We have a number of initiatives where we use applications to help farmers that were not digitally involved initially to do moderately sophisticated resource planning and make sure they have business strategies. And this has proven quite successful in transforming a subsistence farmer into an organized food producer for the long run, for supplying food to the population that needs it in Bangladesh. And then finally, the point of shortening supply chains, I think is absolutely crucial. How do you link farmers better to their producer rather than having so many middlemen and uninformed decisions for a farmer to actually sell their product in a national market? You wanted me to stop at 2 minutes. I think that was 3. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on that.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was pretty sharp, pretty sharp. I hear you totally on the points that you mentioned. Rasha, coming to you quickly, we're hearing about the collaborations requirement. So if I may ask you, how do you see the opportunities for collaboration between the Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, and WFP in this regard of resilient agricultural development in Bangladesh? If you could quickly highlight on that.
Thank you, Rubaiyat. And I believe we already are collaborating together and supporting the government of Bangladesh in this regard. Perhaps I'd like to highlight two main collaborative initiatives. First, with WFP, WFP is supporting in mapping poverty and vulnerability in rural areas, and this will help the government as well as the investments funded by IFAD to target the more vulnerable communities within Bangladesh, and also because the vulnerability of these communities will be better explained, then the package of support can be better customized. So we're really expecting very good feedback from this study. And the second with FAO, and for example, you would see that Mr. Zahir Ahmed had raised a question about the role of the Department of Agriculture Marketing. So actually with FAO, we are working in building the capacity of the Ministry of Agriculture. And within the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture and Marketing, to be able to work on value chain development and building in the required extension and research linkages to be able to help farmers better meet the market standards, as well as produce the commodities required by the market in a productive manner, while also preserving sustainable production practices. So these are just two examples of what already the three Rome-based agencies are working on together. There will be a further collaboration as we move forward. I already see that FAO has a collaboration with the government of Bangladesh on how to promote nutri-dense food. So this is something that we will be very happy also to learn from, so that the required value chains can be developed around this concept. The other is also we plan to use the hazard analysis critical control points, HACCP approach, to basically identify food safety related risk as well as climate related risk across the value chain, and support mitigate these risks through the required logistics and investments. So here again, we will be relying on the knowledge and expertise of WFP and FAO to do so. So this is just a brief example of really the quite big area of opportunities that lies ahead. Thank you, Rubaiyat.
Thank you so much, Rasha. So thanks so much. Pete, coming to you quickly, we have heard about the social protection requirements, and Mr. Merab has briefly spoken about it. If you have any further reflection on your undertaking to strengthen social protection in response to the pandemic, a quick reflection on the social protection interventions.
Okay, social protection definitely is a very important aspect in dealing with the impact of the pandemic in Bangladesh, when you see the numbers of people who are impacted. At the same time, that means that we have to be realistic and who can address this. The response has to be of such a magnitude in terms of millions of dollars per month that only the government really has the purse to carry it. So that means that we as development partners really need to see how we can strengthen the government's response and make the government's response as agile and as responsive as possible. So the project that Robert has been referring to several times, wherein we work together with FAO, on the urban side, what we are trying to do there is modeling and trying to see how we can make sure that when you, through social protection schemes, hand out cash, that this cash also becomes food. We're using a new approach wherein we have a cashback system. We have a number of shops wherein we bring in fresh food, a lot of fresh agricultural products, and they are the obvious link with FAO. And then we basically, using some app that we actually developed for the response to the Rohingya, we're tracking what people are consuming, and then what people are procuring and just consuming, we give them behavior change communication to encourage them to buy this healthy food. And then at the end of the month, next month, they get a certain amount of the cash back together with their next month's stipend. So in that way, we really bring this whole cycle of getting private sector, getting government systems, getting farmers, agriculture producers into the whole cycle to really strengthen the nutrition impact for the poor people who are supported through safety nets. Wherein clearly we have a collaboration with FAO, but also with UN Women and other agencies we're looking at, and IFAD having its link into the different ministries to really look at how to scale this up and how to work on strengthening those supply chains clearly can have a very strong role in this also. Back to you.
Thank you so much for the sharp explanation on social protection. Mia, you have been doing a very hard listening for the last 70 minutes, but we have heard quite a lot of insights on how the food systems have been disrupted, what are the major priority issues on nutrition and food security and livelihoods. And our panelists have clearly marked with regards to policies, implementations. They've also highlighted some of the future courses of actions. So over to you, Mia, to give us a final word on what you have collected as your key takeaways from this discussion.
Thank you very much. And I think it would I'm not going to claim to be summarizing this incredibly rich conversation, but I think it gives very good pointers to areas for further discussion and also areas of further collaboration and work. It is clear from the various comments and from the discussion that the three Rome-based UN agencies share a common vision of ending hunger and malnutrition. It is also clear that this is a strong priority for Bangladesh. This is one of the areas where Bangladesh has development gains to be proud of, but development gains that needs to be continuously developed and nurtured and further innovation around it in order to keep it that way. I think the discussion has also shown without any doubt in a very concrete manner how the SDGs are linked and how agriculture does not only relate to SDG 1 and 2, but to several of the other SDGs, be that gender in terms of women's role in agriculture, which has a further link, unfortunately, to unpaid labor of women, but also to goals around sustainable consumption and, of course, and always, the environment and climate. I think the discussion has brought home without any doubt the fact that while this year, which has been such a challenging year for all of us at the individual community, for the country at the global level, so while in Bangladesh, it hasn't actually had an enormous impact on agriculture production, but because of the poverty impact, it has had a great impact on, or a negative impact rather, on access to food, partly because of the challenges with the distribution and storage issues that has been highlighted, and also because of the lack on the limitations on mobility that first the lockdown measures introduced, and to some extent continuously in view of health measures and of course jobs. This means that the poverty has led to these less healthy diets, less protein, less micronutrients, and therefore a risk of increase in stunting, which is then that direct goal and concern in terms of of the SDG on education. So a very sharp conversation to really paint that picture of how the SDGs are interlinked. I appreciate your last question to, sorry, to the three Rome-based agencies regarding their collaboration, and of course the examples from my colleagues of how the agencies are working together. It is important, and this is a commitment at the corporate level, to see joint programming, to see co-creation around policy implementation, to see identification of opportunities, and of course that continued joint advocacy and sharing of knowledge and experience. I think it's important to recognize that this is not something that stays with the Rome-based agencies. As Pete was saying, we are rather small players in this sector in Bangladesh, and it's very much reaching out and creating the platforms like this one that brings in the think tanks, brings in academia, brings in civil society, brings in, importantly, the private sector and the government. I think this conversation has also been very clear on saying, highlighting the importance of data and analysis, of having spaces to discuss high quality data and analysis, making the data available to all through public dashboards, through big data based approaches, and through technical conversations that can really examine the data for what does it point to in terms of policy implication and informed decision making. This is particularly important now because this might be to some extent this year as well, much as it is an exceptional year, this the season for Christmas songs. But this is also the season for planning and strategizing in Bangladesh. So the government is at its final stages of finalizing the 8-5-year plan. And of course, that includes the development strategy on agriculture and other sectors. Aligning with the 8-5-year plan, the UN system is preparing its UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which is our most important instrument for planning and implementation of development activities on the ground. And IFAD is, I understand, designing and finalizing its country strategy. So this clearly shows the opportunities and the need to bring the best brains together as this workshop has done to think and strategize. Three last points. The first one is just to reiterate the point. The SDGs is about leaving no one behind. And we have to be very intentional when we talk about leaving no one behind. We have to follow the data to be sure that we actually know who has been left behind or who risks being left behind. This is both in terms of groups, and Bob from FAO referred to the smallest of the smallholders. And it is also about geographical areas. And there was a comment in the chat box to the Charles and the Hoa areas. So it's both, leave no one behind. The data is there to put a sharp spotlight on who runs the risk of being left behind. And this is both in terms of groups of people as well as in terms of geographical areas. Second point is green recovery. There's a lot of emphasis and lots of words around, cleaner, sustainable, inclusive, equitable recovery. But there's also a consistent conversation, a global conversation about green recovery. You know that it was 5 years since the Paris Agreement yesterday. You've seen some of the analysis that actually points to the fact that if all countries unite and if the political will is there, we actually can impact climate change. And here, of course, Bangladesh leadership at the global stage is also recognized. But I don't think green recovery is possible in Bangladesh or anywhere around the world if the agriculture sector is not considered as a key piece in a green recovery. And that then requires really unpacking what we mean with climate smart agriculture, and references has been made in the discussion to that as well. In terms of the role of agriculture in recovery, it also requires a conversation looking at the considerable stimulus packages of the government of Bangladesh, which has been referred to in discussion, and making sure that these indeed support not building back the same, but building back greener and cleaner. And my last point is, which has also been referred to, let's keep in mind to think beyond. We're all very focused on, the light at the end of a very long tunnel that the global community hopes that the vaccines will bring. But if we think that this will be the end of disasters, we are obviously fooling ourselves. So that look beyond COVID recovery to really start thinking through how do we have a resilient food system that is sustainable to the planet, that is equitable to the consumers, and that produces healthy human beings. So let me congratulate all the panels for what I have found to be a very rich and interesting conversation. Let me thank IFAD for organizing this. Let me thank everyone who has presented and who has spoken, and of course, the very skillful facilitation of this workshop. It's been a tough year. I hope it's been a year that we will come out of a bit wiser and a bit kinder, and that we all enter 2021 with hope, solidarity, and renewed commitment. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Mia. It was quite reflection. And I really liked, as you said, I mean, the theme that has come out today is interconnectedness of the SDGs. It has clearly come out. And I also liked how you said it's about leaving no one behind. So gender equality is indeed a major point here. You also connected it to climate response. I think that's also very important. And some of the participants were asking that question about how to link it with climate response, and Rob was also reflecting on it. So fantastic, thank you so much. So thank you all to the panel as well. We still have a few questions. So Mia, I know that you'd have to leave. So if you may permit me, I will want to continue with some of the questions. Can I?
Of course, please do. Continue all night. I think there's a lot to talk about.
No, we will just finish in 10 minutes. Thank you, Mia. So thank you so much. So dear panelists, I'm coming back to you all. So there was a question on gender, and Mia has reflected on that. But it's still, if you have any reflection, I would really ask you to share your feedback, because I think, we have also been doing a lot of analysis, and it's clearly showing that the impact has been more on the women and the children when it comes to livelihood, food security, and nutrition. So over to you, any of you, do you want to have any reflection on that?
So Rubaiyat, maybe I can start.
Yes, Rasha, please. Yeah.
Very good. So the question is very relevant, especially that we know that women constitute the bulk of agricultural labor force and do many of the agricultural activities, whether from production, processing to marketing. In IFAD, we've taken a commitment of gender mainstreaming in all the funding that we provide to government entities. And we have also taken the commitment that for at least 25% of the projects we support, that we will be promoting gender transformative approaches, whereby the barriers of gender discrimination are addressed and resolved. I must say that the work that we support in Bangladesh is a shining example of how this can be achieved in the agricultural sector, and where women are really not left behind. They are actually at the forefront of many of the financing of enterprises, farming businesses, promoting nutrition sensitive agriculture, and so forth. And we do that very much through a very strong social mobilization and awareness raising, as well as dedicating a number of activities specifically to women. And we have very good examples, whether these are the women sections in the rural markets or the women operated labor contract societies to work on the maintenance of the rural roads and other access infrastructure. And of course, they are also very much leaders when it comes to setting up and expanding enterprises along the value chains. And we see that from the PKSF portfolio, where they represent from 50 to 80% of the borrowers. I'll stop here, Rubaiyat, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rasha. I can see Merab raising his hand, but I'll come to Merab, over to you. But Rob, I thought you have some reflection on that too. Rob?
Yeah, I'll try to take 1 minute, just compliment what Rasha has already said. And yes, I mean, this is the perspective that you have in any given population, you have about 51% female, and particularly in agriculture, you have an overrepresentation of female workers, and oftentimes considered an informal labor within the agriculture sector. And this is something that has to change, not just for a gender-based reason, but it also has massive economic impacts on society. The ag sector could grow significantly in that regard, but by empowering and bringing a fair role to gender within agriculture, you have a longer time frame that children are going to stay in school. You have ultimately lower birth rates, and there's a number of other dividends that come out of this. So I think this is a very important background to reflect on. Within our projects, certainly within our nutrition programs with the Meeting on Nutrition Challenge, funded by the EU and USAID, there's a policy component that looks at gender quite significantly, and then an education component in children's schools specifically for nutrition and balancing that within gender components. With our work with IFAD, with the Smallholder Agriculture Competitiveness Project, we follow all of the gender guidelines that Rasha has already announced, but also bringing that down to the farmer-producer level and within the value chains that we're looking at within this project. And then finally, in our work with producer organizations, within our Missing Middle initiative, we've focused extensively on female headed organizations and ensuring that there's access to credit and fair opportunity in terms of their business management strategies. So these are a few examples of where we're pushing this, but I think overall there's a massive push in terms of the 8th five-year plan in terms of gender all across sectors. And a strong policy push within the transformative agriculture sector for a greater recognition and action toward gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Dr. Merab, you have some reflection on that.
I'll just quickly add to the great points made by Rasha and Bob. So I will just draw upon a survey that was carried out by IFPRI, a phone survey, to understand the gendered impact of COVID-19. So I'll just highlight the main results very quickly. One of them is on intimate partner violence. And we found that, conflicts, so before COVID-19, around 19% of women, they reported to never have any conflict with their spouses, right? And this came down to only 2%, when we interviewed them in August. So this is a sign of tension, and potentially it has implications on intimate partner violence and so on and so forth. We also found that the month-wise frequency of domestic conflict was highest in April and May in this year. So which coincides with the months of the lockdown when the highest proportion of households reported to have lost income. In terms of potential policies, Bangladesh has been at the front line of innovative programs that also have implications on reduced intimate partner violence. So group-based programs in Bangladesh, there have been a lot of rigorous research that show that reduced domestic conflict and violence against women, and group-based activities. So when it comes to group-based programs, savings programs, savings groups, for example, Grameen Bank, BRAC, and other organizations. I think that could be one way of just basically scaling it up. We have also have IFPRI and WFP. A program was designed and evaluated by IFPRI and was implemented by WFP. It's called TMRI, Transfer Modality Research Initiative, which actually showed a very, very strong effect when BCC is combined with receiving transfer. So Pete already mentioned, about scaling up those kind of programs. So just to quickly highlight that about since we're talking about gender. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was a very interesting question on, let's say, since people have started to, let's say, sell land, how would it impact the future of food security? I think, Rasha, you've already addressed that question directly. But I still see one last question that's exciting for me. It's, Tayan is asking, COVID-19 has indeed exposed the fragility of food supply system across the world, but in case of Bangladesh, which part of the food supply system was most affected? I think we can end this session by answering this question. So Mr. Merab, Rob, Pete, Rasha, to you, what part of the food supply system was most affected according to you? One last reflection.
You're looking for volunteers to start, it sounds like. I'll be the guinea pig. Honestly, I'm not sure I can answer that. I think there are just so many impacts, and it was so interrelated to the poverty dynamic and other things. If there's a lockdown, clearly the entire supply chain is hugely impacted, and those that make their daily wage on this and that are the most vulnerable to shock are going to be the most heavily impacted in this regard. And oftentimes those end up being the smallholders out in the field that are getting 2 or 3 taka per piece of fruit or vegetable. But it doesn't underscore the massive urban poverty that took place, and particularly in the lockdown, and it's still going on. So it's hard to target one exact spot. What I will say is, looking forward, what we really learned from this, and what I see as the takeaway, is that we need more resilient food systems, and overall, because we don't know what the next shock is going to be, and clearly there's already impending issues of climate change. So building the COVID is a wake-up call to understand how to make our supply chains more resilient to all other shocks. And I think the climate change is the next one, looking at climate smart agriculture, precision agriculture, and adapting to these situations is going to be a massive thing that I think FAO, WFP, and IFAD are all ready to take on, along with our other partners such as IFPRI and BARC and another set of organizations in country, along with government. But I think this is our challenge forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Rasha?
Thank you, Rubaiyat. I would agree with Rob, and I believe the discussion has highlighted that distribution channels were a major bottleneck, as well as indicated earlier, the whole aspect of accessibility to food, especially nutritious food, because of the reduction in household incomes. Again, these are the situation, or let's say the problems and challenges have been analyzed. I believe this discussion has shown that we do have the solutions, and now it's a matter of making sure that these solutions are implemented as we go forward, and a better coordination of these efforts are done, so that the benefits reach all vulnerable households. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Rasha. I think equality and benefits reaching out to all households is coming out as a theme. Pete, your final reflection.
Just to add to that, and that's just to highlight again what we're working on with FAO is basically looking at both sides. So yes, there's the demand side, there's the supply side which was affected, but there's also the demand side that was affected. So and when we were pitching this project to some of our donors, we basically said, look, you can buy one and get two. It's by supporting people in urban areas who are in need. If we are smart and link this to the smallholder farmers, producers, we can actually help both sides. And that's the whole thing. And that's really where we believe that this can be a strong example for the government, how through very targeted and well thought through responses, you can use the same financial resources in multiple ways that they have an impact across different sectors. If we would just go and say, okay, we'll work with the poor people in the urban areas and forget about the producers, and then you have a separate program to help the producers, you pay twice. While in this way, if we're smart about it, we can actually have a double impact with the same resources. And it's about smart programming and smart design of your programs and link them so that you really can bring about multiple impacts with a targeted intervention. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Pete. Dr. Mehra, do you have any final reflection?
Sure. I think this has been a fantastic discussion, and I think over and over again, I think we keep hearing about the importance of making sure that the targeting is good. And we heard from Russia about poverty mapping, and also from Piet about the social protection programs, for example. So region-based targeting, occupation-based targeting, these are potential ways where targeting can be improved. We have seen, I've talked about the research about how cash-based targeting did not actually work that well. It might be because the government actually did it at a large scale for the first time, after the pandemic started. But food-based transfer programs, those are more traditional type programs that actually have very good targeting. I think the government can potentially think about employment generation program for the poorest, EGPP, or food for work type programs. Very similar idea that it's kind of self-targeted in the sense that the poorest are the ones who are going to come in the lines, and they're it's kind of more efficient that way potentially. So some thoughts that hopefully the policymakers, I'm sure they're already thinking about it, but hopefully they can take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mehra. Mr. Motiramman, are you there with us? Mr. Motiramman, are you there with us?
Unmute korte hobe.
Yes, I am here, please.
Fantastic, sir. So you have heard from all the speakers, and they have also iterated the importance of partnership with the government. So your remark or final reflection on what have been your takeaways?
So maybe I can jump in here since Rubaiyat is having some connection issues. So Mr. Motiramman, sir, you have heard all the panelists and also our resident coordinator, Ms. Mia Seppo. We request you maybe in 2 minutes, if you could share with us your final comments, and also if you have any reflections or opinion about how development partners like FAO, IFAD, and WFP could do, what else we could do to support the government. Over to you, Mr. Rahman.
Thank you, Tabassum, and thank you, Rubaiyat, for giving me a chance, and for everything. You already included me for the panelist discussion. And I heard everything. This discussion was very fruitful, undoubtedly, and all the panelists cover everything. I think in this discussion about food, sustaining food security, nutrition, livelihood, coping with pandemic. Everything discussed in oil manner. No doubt, sure. I want to say IFAD and the World Bank in my project, they are also developing partner in my project, and for developing agriculture and sustaining food security, nutrition, and livelihood. We are working jointly with World Bank and IFAD, and they are also development partner. The government, government has already a policy, and we are arranging a policy dialogue with the suggestions of World Bank and IFAD. Immediately we will arrange a policy dialogue with all our with the partners and our already developing partners will contribute also in our policy dialogue. And by this time government has already taken say a big work plan with short term, long mid terms, and long term project. We have a work plan, and with this similar activities in our project, we are also taking initiative. And we take mobile market systems and mobile apps and hand delivery, home delivery, agriculture import, and many ways, many instruction is there from government side. And our honorable Prime Minister instructed no piece of land will be vacant, and no pen will be unturned. This was also our government side. And now only the two sector is very much important to our government. One is a health sector for COVID-19, and another is agriculture. For agricultural improvement, Bangladesh is, in a better position for we are facing COVID-19 in better than developing country like America, US, London. In our country, we are facing only why we are cop up the agriculture is an important sector, and our government already emphasized this sector. I think we are going with this our project, and our farmers we are going well, and government is taking many more initiative in this sector. So I think we are in right track. For this session and for this this talking, it is very fruitful. It will help us undoubtedly to develop our activities and take initiative. It will help. This type of talking will help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Motiur Rahman. It has been a wonderful discussion. I think takeaway for me has been that food security can really be a cornerstone intervention. A cornerstone intervention or keystone intervention is one, if you start to address it, it starts to address the whole system around it. And we have learned how important the food security nutrition issues are. And we have also learned what has worked and what did not. And the speakers have clearly highlighted the need to address this issue on an emergency basis, because this is also connected to the future of the world, the future poverty. And I think, the major message that is coming out is that even though we might say that that the value chains have started to bounce back, that people have income has started to bounce back, but still there are people who have gone below the poverty line and they're struggling to come up, and they have cut down on their food consumption. And that has really started to cripple their nutrition, and which can have a very strong impact for future resilience. And in that regard, our speakers have also explained what resilient interventions should look like. And I think what Mia also said, and what is important to us as a message from this discussion, is that we need to address these issues on an emergency basis, not because of COVID, but because COVID has explained to us or has revealed in front of us what has been the weaknesses in the interventions that we have been implementing. So by tackling those weaknesses, we probably could facilitate more resilient economic systems, more equitable economic systems. So thank you all the panelists for these wonderful reflections. Thank you to IFAD for organizing this webinar series. Thank you to all the participants who have joined from all around the world. The discussion sessions, the recording of it are all available online on YouTube channel. We will send to you the link to the discussion sessions. We will also send to you all the digests that have come out of this webinar series. Thank you everyone for your wonderful reflection and your wonderful participation. The videos will be sent to you on email.
Thank you, Rubaiyat. Thank you all the respected panelists. Thank you for your presence. Bye-bye and have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to participate. Thank you.